Good morning. Right,
Good
it's going to
morning.
be a good couple of days here. So, I know it's 8:30 in the morning. You probably all flew in last night or early this morning, so let's get this started with platform integrations. What's new and what's coming? Who here has been to a Salesforce event before? All right, so you've all seen this slide a gazillion times, right? Myself and my two esteemed colleagues here, we are product managers, which also means we're very optimistic. Don't base purchasing decisions based on what we say today. Base it only on what's generally available, please. So, my name is Raj Advani. I'm a director at product management here at Salesforce. I own change data capture, platform events, streaming API, almost anything to do with event-driven architecture. I've been with Salesforce for 17 years in various different roles, and I'm really happy to be here, and I'll let my two colleagues introduce themselves.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Jeremy Westerman, colleague of Raj and Ross, and I'm responsible for the Salesforce APIs, in particular the APIs for accessing data in your org. And I've been with Salesforce for just over 5 years.
Hey everybody, good morning. Ross Belmont, also product manager and platform integration. I focus more on our outbound integrations, so Salesforce Connect, name, credentials, Private Connect, and talking a little bit today about external services, watching over that as well.
All right, so what are we going to talk about today? We're going a little bit in depth here. We're going to talk really about the new capabilities that we've come out with eventing over the last, I'd say, 9 to 12 months. Then I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy. He's going to talk about the new capabilities with Salesforce APIs. And then Ross is going to bring us home. He's got external services, the new zero copy data integration with Snowflake, and basic auth and 2GP for named credentials. So there's a lot we're going to try to cover in about 40 minutes. We will try to leave a few minutes for questions and answers. I know I have a big gap between my next session, so if we go over, we can always step aside and answer any questions that you may have after the session. So let's get it started with eventing. I always like to give a primer just in case. I know I have a very seasoned audience here, but I'd still like to give just a quick primer. When I talk about eventing and event-driven architecture here at Salesforce, what does that mean? When I started here at Salesforce 17 years ago, I was in services, and I worked with a lot of customers like yourselves building these integrations. And at that point, they would come to me and say, Raj, I have Oracle, and I purchased this new cloud, Salesforce. I need to make sure those two talk to each other. So we'd build a point-to-point integration. It's funny, now I have those same customers calling me 17 years later saying, I have 6 million of these integrations. I can't keep track of them anymore. I'm spending more time and resources keeping those up and running than actually, innovating myself. Help me now that I've matured. And that's where event-driven architecture comes in place. Instead of building all these point-to-point integrations, you're just using the Salesforce event bus as your main freeway, if you'd call it, and those integrations are on-ramps and off-ramps onto that freeway. So you can see how now those same customers come to me and say, I want to add a new integration. I just hook it into the event bus instead of having to build all these things. And the great thing is we manage the event bus for you. So all that time and resources that you're spending now gets offloaded back onto us. So that's what I talk about when I say about event-driven architecture. So at Salesforce, there's two ways that we really work with event-driven architecture. That's platform events and change data capture. For today, we're going to talk a little bit more about platform events. So I have a lot of customers now that are using platform events for part of this event-driven architecture. And they're asking me, I'm using it so heavily on Salesforce, but when I use Apex as a trigger, I can only have one trigger. Or if I have multiple triggers, every trigger is going to get every event. And then I need to make that a little bit more efficient. I'm processing 100 million events a day on Salesforce. If I have 10 triggers, each trigger is getting every event. Help me do that. So we came out with this new process of parallel processing. So now you can have multiple triggers processing events, but every trigger is not going to get every event. So trigger ABC might get events 1, 2, and 3. Triggers DEF might get events 4, 5, and 6, and so on. So they're only going to process the events they get. And you can set this whole up like a hashing algorithm using the replay ID for platform events or any key that you wish to set up. So that's going GA here in winter 25. And it's really going to, like I said, speed up processing for our platform events with Apex triggers. You're going to be able to reduce your usage and increase your throughput at the same time. You'll be able to have up to 10 triggers all processing your events. You can also monitor all these events with a new updated UI. And so, as I said, that's going GA in winter 25. It is in pilot today. If there are any customers out there that are looking to join a pilot or think that this might be valuable to them, come reach out to me and I can get you set up in that pilot right away. The next major innovation, besides the next major innovation we're going to talk to, I also want to give a primer about PubSub API. Who here is familiar with PubSub API? Awesome, that's great. How are you guys liking it so far? Fantastic. So PubSub API is the new way we want customers to interact with platform events and change data capture events. Today, you can use now either Comet-D or PubSub API. And the advantages to PubSub API is really now you can do both things together. You can publish and subscribe from one API instead of having to do different things. So you get a single interface, you get real-time monitoring, you get flow control. It's just a newer, fancier way of working with those platform events. So part of that, a lot of customers also come to me and say, I am spending a lot of time managing the subscriptions for platform events. You guys are telling me I have to keep track of replay IDs. I have to know when the last event was processed. I have to know where to pick up from the stream again. So we're coming out with something called managed subscriptions. And managed subscriptions will work with PubSub API, where all that management that you do of the subscriptions and the replay IDs, we will offload that and take care of that for ourselves now. The great thing about managed subscriptions is you can opt in automatically yourselves. There's no pilot. It's just you can opt in. It's available in enterprise, performance editions, and unlimited editions, and it's ready to go now. The only thing is PubSub API does not work in non-Hyperforce or government clouds. Everything's being moved over to Hyperforce, but if you're a gov cloud, come talk to me afterwards and we'll figure out a solution for you. And finally, give you a little bit idea of some skunk works that we're working on with the change data capture team. We're working on this thing called the replication service. Now this is a little bit more future looking. It's not out yet, but I have, again, other customers that are using change data capture, but they want to be able to get full records. Today, when you do change data capture, the only thing that gets sent in the event are the fields that changed. But I have customers that are saying, I'd love to get an event that has before and after, or all the entire record, not just the fields that have changed. And that's what this replication service will do. It'll give you near real-time updates, but it'll give you the entire record. You'll be able the ability to stream the data, and it's a self-service model. So you can decide which objects you want CDC on, which objects you want replication service on. You can see here's a great chart. It just shows the difference between the two. What does CDC do, or what does replication service do? I highly recommend, if this is something you're interested into, visit some of the Data Cloud sessions today, because this right now, Data Cloud is the only customer for replication service until that goes live, and then we'll be talking about building it out for the rest of our customers. So we're essentially, in my roadmap, I have a CDC product and I'll have a CDC++ product, which is like a CDC on steroids, which is based on replication service. So depending on my customer's needs, I can give you just the CDC if you just need the fields that have changed, or if you need something a little bit more advanced, then we'll have the replication service. So we'll have many flavors to capture all of the use cases that you could possibly need. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jeremy, and he's going to talk about APIs.
Okay, thank you, Raj. Okay, so what's new in the world of Salesforce APIs? Oh, wrong slide, wrong direction. Firstly, I just want to give an update on the Salesforce integration user. I'm assuming that you're all aware of this, but just a brief recap. This is a cost-effective approach, a cost-effective user license for each application to connect to Salesforce with its own dedicated user. We recommend that as a best practice. That means that you can provide specific authorization for what each application is entitled to access, and only give that application the permissions to access that data. And you can also have distinct auditability and traceability. Now, obviously, using a full CRM user license is expensive for that, which is why we have the Salesforce integration user. We are introducing a new profile in this Spring 24 release. It was addressing some issues with the original profile. So if you are using the integration user, you will see this new minimum access API-only integrations profile. It is based upon the existing standard minimum access Salesforce profile. So we would recommend that you migrate over to that, swap those users out. And then in the summer 24, we will just convert that old retired Salesforce API-only systems integration user profile to a custom profile so that you can, therefore delete it if you wish. We are doing a lot of work in the API team on bulk API to query, both to support Data Cloud and also replication service. Because both Data Cloud and Replication Service use bulk API to query for their day zero loads. Every time, now every customer is entitled to Data Cloud. Once you start using Data Cloud, you can extract data from your org into Data Cloud. That initial extract is actually using bulk API to query in order to perform that. So there's a lot of work going on improving bulk API to query, which is going to benefit every customer. Not only are they using bulk API to query for the initial day zero load, they're also using it for incremental extracts as well. So if you set up your Data Cloud CRM connector and for particular objects, particular entities, not only will the day zero extract, but they're also doing 10-minute incremental extracts. So there's a lot of work going on in terms of bulk API to query being driven by Data Cloud and Replication Service. And so, as I mentioned, this is going to benefit all of our customers. It's also supporting a broader strategy. Our goal is eventually to enable customers to migrate from the original bulk API, V1, to bulk API 2. And so that's our long-term goal. And the way that we are approaching that is in a number of fronts. We need to have, for example, throughput and performance equivalency. We need to have feature equivalency, and we're going to provide additional features. So there's also a bit of a carrot and a stick approach. But the goal is that you can achieve the same outcome. You'll be able to take the same query you are applying to bulk API V1, the original, and run that against bulk API 2. You'll have a simpler experience. You'll have a better experience because there'll be more features, but you will have the same data set in the same time and the same throughput. And so we want to achieve that. So that is our strategic goal. And if you are using bulk API V1, keep an eye on bulk API 2 because we will like you to move there over time. So how are we actually enhancing bulk API 2? There's actually 3 phases to a query when we perform the query against the database. The first one is we take your SOCL query and we will validate that it's a valid SOCL query for running against the bulk API 2. We then take that and we execute the query against the database to extract all of, which could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of records from the database into our internal file store. And we actually do this as a series of batches. And then once we've extracted the data into the file store, you can download it over the HTTPS from the API to your client. And the way that we're enhancing that, firstly, we're doing additional query validation. If you submit an incorrect query, we want to validate that and fail as soon as possible. So we use less compute resources. You also get a faster error. Most of the work is actually in the data extract phase. We are doing a lot of work to make sure we don't fail at the extract phase, because all we can do in the extract, if we have a valid query, it will run. We may need to do retries. If a batch query fails because it times out, we can retry that. We're doing some enhancements to reduce that. But our goal is once we get to phase 2, it never fails. And then we're doing enhancements in phase 3 such that you can download the result sets in parallel, and also I'll talk about event-driven. So in the previous release, Winter 24, I just want to recap, in Bulk API 2, we basically enabled PK chunking on every single entity that can support that, basically any entity that has primary key, so nearly 5,000 entities. This makes it a lot more efficient to extract the data because we break the query into a set of batches of 250,000 records using the ID to extract those batches. And then we just execute all of those batches. So it's a lot more efficient way of extracting data. And we just eliminated the 32K character limit in the select cause. That's really about equivalency with bulk V1. So a couple of things we're doing in this release in Spring 24. Firstly is we've enhanced the getJobInfo query API to return a Boolean. It's not feasible to document every single entity that supports PK chunking, so we have a dynamic approach. Once you've created your job, once you've started your job, you can use this query API. It's part of the Bulk API 2 query of the API, and it will indicate whether PK chunking is supported. And so that's a lot more dynamic way. The major enhancement we've done in this release is that we've optimized how we process these PK chunk batches. As I mentioned, we take these batches, they're 250K records, and we would execute them. And sometimes we would find that they would fail. For example, the query could time out against the database, and we would retry up for a maximum of 15 times. Or we came across one example where there was too much data being extracted and the sharing rules were failing. And basically, it means the entire query job fails, and you have to resubmit that as the user. What we're now doing in this release, Spring 24, is that when an individual batch fails, we actually split that batch into two. And so if our 250K batch fails, we'll create two batches, one of 125K records, and execute those. If one of those batches fails, we will further split it into two. And so what this means is that those individual batches will succeed rather than fail. And so you will see an improvement in query reliability. Sometimes it might take a little bit longer because we're now executing some of the batches twice. As we split them, but it's going to lead to an overall improved user experience because less queries will now be failing. I now just want to look ahead a couple of releases to what's coming in the Winter 25 at the end of the year. And we have two major features for downloading the results. Now, I'm a lot more optimistic than my colleague Raj because these have actually been implemented today. And we're actually sort of doing an internal pilot with both of these features with Data Cloud and Replication Service. We would like them to use that in production before we're going to put that into a customer GA. So I'm a lot more optimistic in terms of forward looking. So the first one are the parallel downloads. If you're using Bulk API 2 today, you execute the query, and then once the query is complete, you download the entire result set using a single HTTP call. Download that one at a time. With the parallel downloads, you will be able to download that single result set using up to 5 different HTTP connections. So it'll enable, you'll still keep your HTTP-based API-based model, but you'll be able to download that in parallel up to from 5 different result endpoints. So that will speed up the download. But the big improvement, the big enhancement is the event notification, because we're going to be using platform events. So once you start your job, you'll create your job and start executing it. Salesforce will be able to notify you of the state of that job via platform events. So we will publish events when there's a job state change, but also when there are individual result sets, because when we extract the data onto the file system, we do that in a 1 gig, into a 1 gig file, a 1 gig result set. When each result set is available, we will publish an event with saying this result set is now available to start downloading, even though the query is still executing. So you can start downloading that in parallel. And that event will contain the actual URL to download from. And so you don't have to poll now, checking whether the job is completed. You would just start, you would submit the job, create the job, and then just subscribe to platform events, and we will notify you when those results are available. So you can start downloading while the query is still executing. And so, as I said, both of these are now going into pilot production internally within Salesforce, and then at the end of this year, hoping to get those GA. And two smaller enhancements for the end of the year is we currently have a OAS beta for S-Objects. I would like to GA that beta as is, get that GA, and then build upon that in future releases, expand the scope of that beyond the initial S-Object resources. And then also we intend to enhance SOCL so that we can query Data Cloud data graphs. As part of this closer integration of Data Cloud into the core platform, we're providing it, making it easier for you to access data in Data Cloud as a first-class citizen. And so the Data Cloud data graphs provide fast access to data in Data Cloud, and there'll be a native representation in SOCL to get access to that data. And I will hand that over to Ross.
Okay, I'm going to cover a few different areas today, all sort of under the broad category of Salesforce acting as a client in an integration, so calling out the services you own, data sources you own, et cetera, and how you auth to them and how to make that all work. So if we're running out of time and want to talk more today, I'll hang around, as Raj indicated, got some space after this to cover those topics. Happy to go in depth on anything in this area. We'll start with external services, which is a term we use to refer to OAS. We just mentioned OAS there, right? So use an OAS spec to identify and describe your remote endpoint, wherever it might be, and make it easier to work with that in Salesforce Core to make it available to Flow, our new AI tools, for example, even Apex, to invoke that easily. So this is an update that is in that category that will be going some interesting places in the future, is to be able to call out asynchronously and sort of pick up where we left off later, right? So the request goes out to your endpoint with basically a callback URL you can use to ping back in later, and we can pick up where that left off. So today, this works from the Apex starting point, let's say, to use Apex to start this operation, right? Call out to some job that's running on your side, could take some days, whatever, to complete that processing, maybe even manual human intervention, before coming back in to pick up where you left off. And where this is going in the future is to enable this for Flow. So Flow will be able to start something, right? Fire out, come back in, pick up the interview again, and resume its processing, okay? So keep your eyes open for that. From announcements from the Flow side, we're doing the underlying plumbing work sort of ahead of time to get that to work, and we have an Apex starting point that you can use today, all right? Okay, so moving on to data access, zero copy through what we call Salesforce Connect. So Salesforce Connect has been around for a while, for roughly a decade-ish, right, in terms of offering you a way to use data that you are storing outside the four walls of Salesforce on your own, maybe on your own hardware, and you've got your own OData integration, things like that to make that work. But we've been expanding over the past few years to the major cloud vendors, AWS notably, and now Snowflake, that are more popular in terms of being a central store for your data, right? And so we want to bring Snowflake to the party in a similar way that you've been hearing about using that with Data Cloud in their bring your own lake initiatives. This is similar in terms of bringing in anything in your Snowflake environment, but connecting it directly to core in the way that you're probably used to with Salesforce Connect, right? So we have read-write access through the existing UI, Apex, et cetera, right? An update or DML will translate to an insert or an update on the Snowflake table in question. And you can use that Snowflake data in, like we're showing here, reports, dashboards, just the Lightning UI related lists is really popular. And then with the benefit of you're not actually copying this data into Salesforce. We don't copy, sync, log, or cache any of this data. So you've got it situated how you like it in Snowflake. We can use it wherever you'd like to in Salesforce, and you go from there. And as we worked with Snowflake on this, they nudged us to make sure we support dynamic tables, which is an interesting Snowflake creation that allows you to deal with frequent data changes that would otherwise result in having to solve for streaming and manage that, right? But that can get sorted on the Snowflake side and just treated like a table. So there's more here if you want a full rundown on how to configure this in terms of the basics of what to do on the Snowflake side to create, I think they call it an integration, right? Get the OAuth credentials, put those back into Salesforce. And on top of that, you can be thinking about how to set the authorization to typically what we see is a Snowflake role and how to identify that in Salesforce. So what Snowflake role will Salesforce use to access the tables in question? And you have some dynamic behavior that you can leverage with this because you can put a formula in the credential configuration so that different things can happen at runtime in terms of selecting the right role. So that gives you some nice configurability for how that's going to work. All right, scooch forward. Okay, speaking of authentication and credentialing, let's talk about named credentials. Named credentials have changed a lot over the past couple of years. We've migrated from the sort of legacy architecture we had where everything was sort of jammed into one table to a more growable architecture for the future where we've got a lot more headroom to add innovations, a lot of which had been long requested and commonly used. Things like API keys, right? Needing to use the client credentials variant of OAuth, custom claims and JOTs, getting better fine-grained permissions. A lot of these things that we've added and improving the metadata sort of packaging story, right? So those are reasons to take a look at the new iteration of named credentials if you have not had a chance to do so and you're still sort of relying on what you've had maybe for some years. I'll talk about some of the more specific things we've added recently. There we go. Okay, so client credentials is one I mentioned. It's a pretty popular sort of piece of the OAuth spec. I'll make sure you guys can see the QR code there for the specific instructions on how to make use of that, right? Client credentials comes into play when there is think about a machine-to-machine or server-to-server use cases where Salesforce is the client, like I said before. It basically has a programmatic name and password to identify it. And then we get a token back and use that for the rest of it, right? But end users don't need to take action. You can set this up once as an admin. This is GA now. We see this was typically associated to requests to work with Azure. So if you have Azure investments, this should help you out, and you can stop writing that code to do that OAuth handshake in Apex. Similarly, this was sort of an easy one, but a feature gap we had to close is basic auth, right? There's still systems out there using basic auth, some legacy stuff. Twilio still uses basic auth. But the good news here is that this gives us feature parity in the new architecture compared to everything we had in legacy. So now all the auth protocols that we had previously, we have support for in the new named credentials architecture and ones that we've only added to this new stack, right? Jeremy mentioned carrot and stick a second ago, right? So adding more carrots, steak, and even ice cream to the new, more delicious named credentials and leaving the old ones as they are, right? So now that we've got basic auth, you can go ahead and switch everything over. And we've also strengthened the packaging and metadata story, right? So there's multiple pieces to a named credential. You've got the endpoint, you've got the authentication, right? And then you've actually got the secrets. Secrets will basically never be able to be packaged in the traditional sense due to how packaging works and the fact that when you were to, let's say, extract a bunch of metadata from your org, look at those files, right? It's plain text XML. It's not going to work to have those passwords come out of Salesforce and sit there in plain text. So what we've provided is a way to populate those using APIs. So you can build CI/CD pipelines and do infrastructure as code, policy as code style deployments. So you're not manually clicking, in the Salesforce environment after you've, moved your packages, be they from ISVs or ones you've built yourself, right? Because we know that a lot of you have requirements to be touchless in production as much as possible so that you can script all this. Now you can actually use these APIs to set up credentials completely from scratch. You don't have to use packaging, but if you want to, you can use 2G packaging to the sort of fullest extent that's possible, and all the details are on this in this new packaging guide that I'm highlighting here. So take a look at that if you're thinking through how to leverage this capability, but also move it between environments and plan for sandbox production, et cetera. Do you have a sort of test version of the remote system on the other side so that you're not using the production system in your sandboxes, et cetera, right? Just got to think that through. But we have good answers for this issue now. And speaking of that, a small change that also just went out in spring 24 is that when you do a sandbox refresh, we're not copying down any sensitive values or tokens from production to that sandbox. This is a security-oriented request we got from a lot of large customers because we don't want that sandbox to automatically get access to the remote production system just because you did a refresh, right? So there you go. So again, connecting the story back on the previous slides, planning out how you have the external prod and external test or staging, and how you plan for your sandboxes and your production environments in Salesforce, and how you're going to move the credentials around them using a mixture of packaging or APIs and CI/CD, et cetera, GitHub Actions, whatever you want to do, right? There's now enough pieces for you to put together a working solution that is much more robust and gets you out of post-deployment steps clicking in the UI. All right, so the last thing I'll point out here that I wanted to leave as a reference for especially a technical audience like this is if you're not really still fully grokking and absorbing the new name credentials thing, maybe the permissioning is throwing you off, right? There are a lot of changes. And so we put this together to give you a deeper dive into truly understanding what we were thinking, what's behind this idea, and sort of why we're going there and where it landed, okay? So if you want to understanding credentials and all the pieces of it in a fuller way, take a look at this. It's a blog post I wrote up myself, we put out there, and it's sort of straight from the horse's mouth in terms of what we're shooting for. Okay, well, there we go. So we've got some time left and would love to hear questions. Thanks for showing up early, and thanks for your innovations and your investment in our platform.